Welcome back to Dirty Horror Podcast. I am Justine, aka JustineUFF, and with me I have Brian from Horror at Random. We are going to get into part 2 of the 90s, which is probably the most exciting for me.
Yes, absolutely.
We have a lot of movies to get through, so this one's going to be a little different than our other ones. We're going to kind of pow through them as quickly as possible, but we will probably take a little bit longer than we need to.
Probably, yeah. We're going to try and rapid fire, but yeah, it's the 90s, so
We get a little
whatever.
excited.
Yep.
The first movie I want to jump into is 1994, Interview with the Vampire. Now,
Yes.
I understand that you could not finish this film.
So, I mean, I wouldn't even say I couldn't finish it. It was really slow to begin with. I fell asleep and never picked it back up. Eventually, I do plan on finishing it. But yeah, you're going to have to take this one because I made it to like the 30-minute mark, I think.
Neil Jordan, he also directed a film called Byzantium, which is another favorite vampire film of mine. I prefer it over this one, so maybe that one will be good for you.
Yeah.
This one, I think, is a classic vampire gothic horror where we're talking about two vampires traveling through time, their battle with loneliness and accepting what they are. Probably Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt's best performances. I am a huge fan of them. Now, we will talk about another film with Brad Pitt that I think is also one of his fantastic performances.
Yeah.
I love the dynamic between Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt's characters. They did that really well. And I love Kirsten Dunst. This was like breakout performance for her. Incredible. Just to show what she would be capable of in the future.
Yeah, I've never made it to the Kristen Dunst part, but I will say right off the bat, Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, you can tell the chemistry between the two is off the charts. So even though I didn't finish the movie, that's one thing I could notice right away.
Fun fact about the makeup for Interview with the Vampire, from my understanding, they hung them upside down to like make their veins pop out of their foreheads so that they could paint them bluish and like highlight them where their actual veins were so that it would be super realistic. So when you go back and watch that movie, if you choose to, or any of you guys listening in choose to go rewatch that movie, check out where the vein placement is because that's so cool to me.
Yeah, I could never do that as an actor. I'd be like, fire me, but that's cool. Rumpelstiltskin. You can say that 7 times fast. I had to put this on the list because it was the first ever B horror movie that I've ever seen. It was creepy as all hell to me. It released in 1995, so I was really young. It was right after I saw Nightmare on Elm Street. I just remember I love old fairy tales and urban legends. The whole Rumpelstiltskin thing really was cool, and it just has like a special place in the 90s for me, so I felt like I had to add it. It's really by no means a really good horror movie. It's by no means well acted, but it's cool. Yeah, right.
Now, Rumpelstiltskin, it sounds very similar to kind of a trend that happened in the late 80s and early 90s-ish era where they were redoing a lot of classic fairy tales in really dark ways. Like there was the Sigourney Weaver Snow White one.
Yep. Yeah, and I always got them confused because the covers look a lot alike and they're like the same type of movie.
We talked about Brad Pitt a little bit earlier. We alluded to this film. This is most people's favorite David Fincher film of 1995, and that is Seven.
Absolutely. I could argue that some people might not consider this horror. And then I
was totally going to bring that up.
And I will argue that, first of all, the little sex toy scene and the scene where the guy's on the bed and he wakes up.
Oh, God, yeah.
No.
How is that not horrifying?
It's absolutely horror. You can't change my mind on that.
Yeah, I would argue if Seven is not horror, neither is Saw.
No.
They are very similar in tone and flavor. I think Seven birthed the films like Saw and another one that we will talk about later, Cube. I think that this film was the start of really diving into the horrors of serial killers. And perhaps this was a predecessor to Saw, but I think that it's also a great next step from Silence of the Lambs.
Absolutely.
Which we also discussed and consider horror. So to me, if it's a serial killer doing serial killer stuff, I think it's horror.
Oh, and one of the biggest twist, it wasn't even a twist ending, but at the end, it was the biggest climax, shocking climax without showing that much, where you're just like, holy shit.
The implication.
You know? Yeah.
What's in the box? Oh, it was heart-wrenching too.
Yeah.
Like, you just felt for these characters because you're following these protagonists from the beginning and you're hoping and rooting for them. You're seeing what they're seeing and you have like this idea of how it's going to conclude. To kind of go through that torture with them, you really like are grounded with these characters.
It was hard hitting. Yeah. And like I said, some of the scenes were better than half the horror movies I've seen. So talking about 90s horror 7 completely, it makes that list.
Yes. And I'm a sucker for whodunit horror. I love the classic 90s thrillers. I love the classic 90s detective whodunits. But I think one in particular, one whodunit horror that just tops them all for me is 1996 Scream. Wes Craven knows how to do a meta, self-aware whodunit horror.
Really does.
From there on.
It was such a perfect storm of we hadn't had, so like mainstream wise, technically we hadn't had good horror, some would argue, up till this, or at least slashers have been slacking for real up until Scream. And not only did he bring slashers back, he turned it on its head with the actors, the storyline, the music. For me, the score is probably what sets this movie apart more than anything. It was really like striking lightning twice. It was insane.
Yeah, it totally reinvigorated the genre, the subgenre, slasher subgenre, and it added that whodunit element that I think really kind of brought everybody to enjoy it. I think it was such a good way to capture a commercial audience for the horror genre, while also nodding and winking at those horror people who got you there, right?
Yeah,
Wes Craven was like, I see you, I like you, I love you too.
Yeah, where Billy basically looks in the camera and he's like, we all go a little mad sometimes, you know? It's like, okay, he loves horror fans and he knows what we want, you know?
Yeah, and then of course Randy, he's all of us, right?
Oh my God, I know. It was so good to have Randy as the proxy to the fans, you know.
I think Wes Craven is the father of meta self-aware horror. Another director that does it pretty well is Robert Rodriguez. He does it. He got into it with, I think, Tarantino. You know, they're both very similar with that very self-aware humor. They know what they're doing. They're almost satirical in nature. And he did From Dusk Till Dawn, which I think is, again, one of the best vampire films of all time.
Right.
So fun.
It's fun. It's sexy. I mean, and just like any good movie we're talking about in the 90s, you had either Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, or George Clooney. And George Clooney is a handsome ass motherfucker. And watching him in From Dusk Till Dawn was amazing. But honestly, I thought this was a Tarantino film for a long time before I found out it was Robert Rodriguez.
And a lot of people do think that he was a producer and writer. So he did produce and write it with Robert Rodriguez. So if you were to say like it's a Tarantino movie, you're not wrong. Right. He did write it. I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah. You know, the scene with Salma Hayek, and we got
I fell in love with
Tom Savini. I mean, there's just
Sex Machine.
Like, how can somebody like him just ooze sexual appeal on that screen, you know? The effects were great. It was fun. It was a great vampire movie.
It was. One of my favorite scenes, of course, is the Salma Hayek reveal where she comes out, you know, everything is so sexy and sensual. And that is what we associate vampire films with. Sexy, sensual, dark, taboo.
Yep.
But then it flips and they all actually turn real ugly.
Yeah. And
I love that.
Both sides of vampires, right? You got completely sexy while they're human, but ass ugly when they're not human. And
monstrous.
And there's barely any transition. It's just like humans, then vampires.
Right. And then everything is just a gore fest from that moment on. Like it really kicks into high gear. I love when they look back at the band and the band's like playing bodies.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic.
It was Tarantino needs to do more horror. I'll say that. I know it's not his movie,
Robert Rodriguez,
but like, sure. Yeah, they both have the same style, and I think Tarantino's missing out on not doing more horror because I'm thinking of this now, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that typically the horror genre, people dip their toes in it, they get their start there, and they tend to not come back. And then you have a few that are just all about it, and they just live it, breathe it. I would love to see it because he is really gory. I think that they do a great job. Planet Terror was so fun.
Oh, yeah.
So dipping into 1996, we have Andrew Fleming, who did The Craft. There's a lot of time capsule horror movies that we're going to talk about today.
Yes.
The 90s, man, was such a mood. It was a vibe.
It's hard to
get that for women. It just nails it.
It's hard to explain, and it's hard to tell people, like young people nowadays, what the 90s was like. It was like a very, like you said, like a vibe, like very not give a fuck, very do what you want type.
Yeah. Grunge and punk really took off and found their like footing in the 90s. And rock generally got a revival. It was all dark goth, and taboo.
You had goth, and that's kind of where The Craft
anti-culture.
Subculture, anti-culture.
The Craft was such a cool capturing of that because, for one, it's focused on women. So I think I relate to that a lot because I think I just wanted to look like them. Forever. I still want to look like them. They're so cool.
Yeah. I mean, Fairuza Balk, she had no right being as sexy as she did in this movie.
And crazy.
Yeah, but she was crazy and sexy, and she captured the screen every time she was on.
Yeah, and I think it did a good job blending that kind of that anti-culture, the idea that they're doing whatever they want, they don't give a fuck.
Right.
They're just doing it. And then also they're doing witchcraft, which is also very like anti-culture of its own. It's very not mainstream. It's a persecuted thing. So it's very cool in this movie, right?
But there's also a lesson behind it too, because it's not just a meaningless do what you want type movie. The more power they get, the more they fuck around, specifically, you know, one girl, and you find out there's consequences and people are losing their minds, and we end up getting the climax of the movie, one of the best visually effective endings in a 90s movie I've ever seen. I just love it with the snakes and the floating and she looks
and the
like
bugs coming out of the sink and
she looks like something out of a Sam Raimi movie when she's floating with the knife. It was
and then her toes are dragging along the floor. So I do love that there is that element of don't become the monsters you hate kind of story in it, where the more power they got, the more they became the bullies that they hated and the ones that were the antagonists in the film to begin with. So they became the bullies, they became the bad guys, except for Robin Tooney's character Sarah, who was like, no, I'm still good-hearted regardless. Right. She didn't let power corrupt her.
It was really cool. It had a good message behind it, and all the actresses were amazing. Then we had Skeet Ulrich to add on top of it.
Yeah, we love him.
I mean, there wasn't a lot of crazy effects in this movie, but they still made it very, very effective.
Yeah, again, I think something smart that the 90s and 80s did was not try to overextend themselves, and they used what they had to their ability, and what they couldn't do, they implied, and they didn't treat the audience like they were stupid, and I think that worked. It makes things timeless. Speaking of another beloved actor, since we were talking about them, Michael J. Fox in The Frighteners. This one,
I feel like such a failure as a horror fan. I haven't seen this one either, so take it.
That's okay. That's okay. This one is that's why I wanted to talk about it, because I think a lot of people have looked this one over, and it's fantastic. This was done by Peter Jackson in 1996.
Peter Jackson.
Yeah. It has Michael J. Fox and Jeffrey Combs, who is obviously very popular in the horror community as well. And it's very lighthearted and at the same time exciting. Like, I mean, it's very much like Back to the Future meets a horror film, because again, we have Michael J. Fox. It has that same lightheartedness to it that Back to the Future brought to a sci-fi genre, where this is more of like, he is a guy who can see ghosts, he can see the dead, has some ghost friends, and he's kind of a con man. And he basically has his ghost friends go haunt people, and then he is someone who casts them out. They pay him to cast them out. So he's a bit of a con man with actual powers.
Yeah, because I'll tell you what, in Blockbuster, I always saw the cover and I thought it was going to be a really scary, like serious movie. As I got older and the more I became a horror fan, I found out it's not at all. From what people have explained to me, it has kind of a ghost dad with Bill Cosby, you know what I mean, type vibe. I don't know. So yeah, I have to watch it.
Definitely watch it. It's worth it.
I love Michael J. Fox. Yeah, so I have to watch it.
And that's all I'm going to say on it. It's underrated. If you haven't seen it, y'all, go see it. Because
definitely
it's a good time.
That's going to be on my next to watch list.
I mean, I want to say this is one of towards the end of Michael J. Fox's career. I think this is one of his later films that before he stopped acting. So
yeah, it had to be.
And then
what did you say, 97?
1996.
96, yeah. So yeah,
I'm telling you right now, 96 and 97 and 99 are just epic in horror for me.
Bangers for sure. Yeah.
For sure.
Like 96 on, I was surprised. I'm like, wow, this is really when horror took off in the 90s.
And not to do like a whole nother one in a row, but I don't know if you've seen Funny Games, because this is like, if Frighteners had an antithesis, it would be Funny Games.
I haven't seen this one either. So see, this is why I like doing this though, because now I have another movie to watch on my list.
You have a few from just today alone. We got a couple. Funny Games, 1997 by Michael Haneke. And this is Austrian and it is in German. It has an American remake. So if you don't, the American remake is just as good. So Funny Games is a fantastic exploitation, home invasion, horror film. This one is one of the best exploitation home invasion films. It's one of the best. It is sadistic. There is no rhyme or reason to it. Very much like Strangers. You're not going to get any motives. You're not going to get any explanation. It is just, you're in for a sadistic ride.
That's really so creepy when it happens though, right? And we're going to talk about that movie in a different episode for sure, The Strangers, no motive, like because you were home type thing is so fucking creepy to me.
I feel like The Strangers had to have taken inspiration, if not complete ideas from Funny Games. Because
it sounds like it.
It's brutal. I'm not typically one for brutal, sadistic style exploitation films, but I do enjoy this one and I think it's great.
Well, I am, so I'm going to have to look at it. Yep.
So speaking of brutal, Vincenzo Natali's 1997 Cube came out, which I think is a precursor to Saw. I think it did it first.
Absolutely. If fans of Saw don't think that they didn't grab ideas from Cube, you're crazy, because Cube was Saw on a way smaller budget with a way bigger vision. I think
sci-fi theme instead of a crime thriller theme.
Yeah, this was possibly the biggest surprise for me in a long time. When I first watched this movie 10-15 years ago, I expected nothing. It was on the Sci-Fi Channel. I was like, whatever. I'll watch it, I'll check it out, and I was like, holy fuck, I can't believe how good this movie was. It's very open-ended. The ending, you don't get many answers. They worked with a 24 by 24 room or something like that, and the actors and actresses, and they were okay. They weren't perfect, but they were good enough, and the movie worked better because of it, I think. And the traps and the cinematography, everything just was surprising.
So creative. And it's so tense because, for one, the traps, you have no idea what kind of trap they're going to walk into. You don't know when they're going to walk into a trap. Sometimes it gets you kind of comfortable. You're like, oh, figured it out. And then someone gets killed and you're like, ah! Like, you just didn't see it coming.
Which one was it? The acid bath, I think maybe was the one where I was like, holy shit. Brutal. Yeah.
There was one with like, they were like throwing a boot at one point and it like caught fire and it still made me jump. I'm like,
because you just like, right. And they made a bunch of sequels. Nothing captured the magic like the first one.
But they're not bad.
No, they're not.
They're not bad sequels. So definitely check out the sequels. Give them a chance.
Honestly, if I was doing a subgenre list and sci-fi horror was the subject, this would be my top 5. Absolutely.
It's definitely up there for sure. Sci-fi genre is so broad. Cube is like one of those like mystery sci-fi ones, because again, you have no idea why they're there, what is going on. Is this like a alien thing? Is this a government conspiracy?
Yeah, you have no idea, and you don't find out.
You don't. You might in like later.
Yeah, but like
I don't even know, and I don't even know if that's
one
canon.
Yeah, I think the end of this one, it just shows a white like opening and maybe some figures and shadows, and then it ends. You're like,
and she like landed. Didn't she like land in like some water in this room where it was just black everywhere, and it was just a little bit of water, and like that's where she fell into?
I thought the door opens and then we see a big white opening. But I'll tell you what, normally I would be very mad about a movie like that. No, at the end of this, I was like, I don't want to know. Like, it's better not knowing.
Oh yeah, it's almost scarier. Like,
so
what kind of motive could you have for something like that sadistic?
Yeah, and actually the way people turn on each other and like their minds start going crazy because you have no food, no water, all that good stuff. It was cool.
Know what's it was really happen, cool. When you're gonna die, you don't know whose idea you should believe in.
Right.
Oh, it's intense. It's definitely intense.
Really cool movie. If you guys haven't checked it out, absolutely recommend it.
So going into 1997, we have Robert Kurtzman's Wishmaster, and for me, this one is really out of place. This felt like such an 80s movie, but don't get me wrong, it holds up. It is scary. Again, more creative ideas on ways to kill people.
That's what I think I loved most about this movie, was that the possibilities were really endless, and they explore that more in the second one with a scene that's just fucking out there.
I love the party scene when really everything starts to go haywire.
Yeah, the party scene and then the opening of the movie as well. It kind of like parallels itself, because it was like ancient Roman times or whatever at the beginning. And it's a party and everybody turns into fucking lizards and all this other shit.
Feels 80s again.
Yeah, right. And then the party scene goes crazy, kind of like the beginning.
Yeah.
The guy who plays the Jinn, Andrew Divoff, did an amazing job. This was one of the few movies in the 90s that scared me, like really, really scared me.
I still think it's scary. It has a lot of moments that are really uncomfortable to look at. The creativity that comes from being able to take someone's wish, so it has to be something you know somebody would wish for.
Yeah.
Then you have to turn it on its head. So you have to find a way to like corrupt these words that someone would say if they were faced with a wish.
Yeah.
Or just, and not even just a wish, like they know that they're wishing for something. Might be just answering a question, like, oh yeah, I wish I could.
I can't remember.
It's very like casual.
I can't remember if the first one introduced the idea. So I think even if you thought of a wish, he could grant it. So you didn't even have to say it out loud. Maybe it was the second one I was thinking of. The way
in this one, you had to say it. I know you had to say it.
Okay.
He was coaxing it out of them.
Right.
Like he would, don't you just wish you could?
Yeah.
And as long as they said, like if they answered the wish.
Okay, maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Like when he's dressed as the homeless guy and he's like, don't you just wish you could do that? Like his voice was, in my opinion, the best voice of a villain in the 90s. But
again, it does feel very 80s though.
It's very underrated.
I think it's because it's out of place. I think it's a little late. I think these kind of movies were really great in the 80s. They were really big. So when Wishmaster comes out in 97, this isn't.
Yeah, you're right.
Looking at these kind of movies anymore. This has been kind of done.
It kind of felt.
Great, but it's still, you're right. It's underrated. It's a
Hellraiser kind of comes to mind, and like some other movies like that. Yeah.
Anything with Freddy Krueger, he does that too. He does the trickery with wishes, corrupting your dreams. But I think it is cool. It's a cool movie. There's a lot of scenes that super uncomfortable.
As we were talking about, creature features are amazing. And I think the Jinn is definitely a creature feature at heart.
One of the best creature features came in 1997. Louis Yosa did Anaconda. God, I love this movie so much. I love a big snake.
I just remember this movie so much. So I've been on one vacation in my life out in New England, right? And that was to Florida. And we saw it in the theaters. And I remember this because I threw up my blue smoothie everywhere after Anaconda. And I don't know if it was because of the snake or the like too much candy, but I remember it. And I remember John Voight being one of the craziest, scariest non-monster villains that I had seen.
He was freaky. Like, you'd think he was there to help. A total creeper. Like,
right. Yeah.
How did you guys trust this guy? He's just obviously a big walking red flag.
Yeah, right.
Beyond that, I love how like things are kind of just going from bad to worse. And it's not even because of the snake. It's like just because they're trying to go somewhere they shouldn't go. They were not properly prepared or ready for something like that. Things just happen. You know? Now we have a snake in the midst. In the mix.
The cast was fucking amazing because we had Danny Trejo, we had Ice Cube, we had Owen Wilson, John Voight, and J-Lo. I mean,
J-Lo, one of J-Lo's best.
If that cast wasn't ready to set this film up, I don't know how it could have failed. And the CGI was actually pretty decent for its time.
Again, we have like really great practical effects and minimal use of CGI. And when they do use it, I mean, it's obvious. It didn't age
nowadays
really
it is.
Well,
but those days it was
still
pretty
enjoyable.
Good. Yeah.
The majority of it is not CGI. It's again implied. You get like snake POVs and like you get like this really cool like snake kind of puppet that they use. It's fun. There's some funny noises that the snake makes, which I know snakes don't sound like that, but I can look past it. This is the 90s.
The scene where he swallows the bug and they have to cut him out of his throat, that was just as effective because that one freaked me out too. Yeah.
Totally. While we're on the subject of creature features, I do want to like quickly list some that because the 90s was full of them and some of my favorites landed in the 90s, but I can't talk about all of them. So real quick, The Relic, 1997, fantastic. Watch it, check it out. We have Mimic, Guillermo del Toro in 1997. Again, really cool, giant bug. Awesome. Check it out. We have Deep Blue Sea, 1999, which has one of the best deaths in horror.
Yes.
Samuel L. Jackson's motivational speech. And then we have Lake Placid, which has Betty White, R.I.P. Fantastic alligator movie. Oh, so fun. Or crocodile movie, I guess.
Yeah. Betty White is the true villain, though, so.
Oh, yeah. But like, we still love her.
We still love her, yeah.
Then we have Starship Troopers in 1997, which is one of the funniest, ahead of its time creature features and really self-aware. Again, I think that
so
90s
good.
were super meta. I love that one. My
creature
daughter
features
loves that one too.
Up the ass on the 90s. Starship Troopers was amazing. Like you said, we can't talk about them all, so I'll just say that they were all great.
It does lead into the next film, which I'm wearing a shirt for.
There you go.
Faculty.
Yes,
so
the coolest. I'm just gotta say, like, obviously Scream is my best movie of the 90s, or at least one of them, but The Faculty is the cool. I wanted to be Zeke so bad. I got a bowl cut. I had a cowlick. I made sure I had the cowlick. Like, I even wanted to sell scat. Like, come on, people. Take my scat. No. Yeah, like, is that what he called it?
Yeah,
I feel like that's not what he called it.
No,
now
he
that
did.
has
It was
different
scat,
meaning nowadays.
It does.
But it was so cool. I love this fucking movie. Yeah.
Another 90s time capsule. I think that this really captured all of the teen tropes of the 90s. I don't think that teens nowadays have the clicks like we did back then and the tropiness. These are real people in this movie. Like, these characters are legit. I remember people like this in school.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before the internet, before like everything was like very quick to get, like everything was much more quick. So I feel a little bit more diluted, a little bit more, everybody can stay on trend and know what's cool. And it's also much more acceptable to be like who you are than it used to be.
Right.
We used to have these tropes. We used to have the jock clique. You had the nerdy clique. You had the stoner losers. You had the like gothy like types. And then you had like Delilah, the popular girls. You know, like this was very
absolutely. This was kind of like, the peak of clickiness. And no matter who was watching this movie, there was a character you could relate to. And it just made it that much better. And then Mary Beth comes in kind of like, I don't know, Joey from Dawson's Creek, kind of like the girl next door, you'd never suspect
Southern
type girl. Yeah, it just, and this is another one with a star-studded cast. Like I said, Josh Hartnett was amazing. He was so just oozed coolness. And let me just say, stoner dudes who deal drugs in high school didn't own fucking SS Camaros. So that's one thing that
he was a
always
rich
bothered
boy.
me.
He was a rich boy.
He was a rich
His
boy.
mom was always like traveling and
yeah, it was a creature feature. It was a whodunit. It was like the breakfast.
Invasion.
It was like the Breakfast Club with a creature feature on drugs.
Totally. This was you nailed it right there. This is like the Breakfast Club of the 90s.
It's so cool. And I will never get tired of watching it. This scene where they're all in the garage and they're like, he's tweaking, man. Let him fucking tweak.
They're just all giggling.
And I couldn't stop laughing with them. It was amazing.
Yeah, so funny. And this one's super beloved, I think, by our generation. So we're really into it. And a lot of people love 90s teen horror. And anytime that you mention 90s teen horror, The Faculty, Scream, they're all on it. Mm-hmm. I Know What You Did Last Summer. It was a really big deal. Like it's its own subgenre. And it's probably one of my favorites. At least it's my most watched.
Yeah, I think so too. I'd say I'd watch it more than a lot of them.
Speaking of beloved films, The Mummy, 1999, Stephen Sommers. I know a lot of people don't think that this is horror, but it comes from a universal monster.
I will argue that it's not horror, but I'm giving it a pass because I can accept it as horror.
There's a scarab scene that is enough of horror for me.
It is, yeah, absolutely. And because when you base it off, when it's made from a universal monster movie, it gives it a pass automatically.
And I do what I want, so I call it horror.
And it's Justine's part 2 on this, so she gets to do what she wants. When you're talking Brendan Fraser, I mean, there's not a guy more lovable, in my opinion, than him. Yeah,
I love The Mummy. When I saw this movie, it was like Jurassic Park for me. It was this really great adventure that had some amazing characters, a good dose of laughter and funniness, and great comedic timing on Brendan Fraser's part. But it also had like these elements that were really scary. And who didn't want to become an archaeologist after this? Like,
yeah. Absolutely.
I think we all went through a phase where we either wanted to be like digging up dinosaurs or digging up mummies. And Evie, she's so smart and so gorgeous. You got to be nerdy and pretty.
Yeah, and she was on level with Brendan Fraser. Like they just worked very well together.
Yeah, it was a good balance of her saving them and them saving her, and like they're just saving each other constantly.
Is that fight scene between her and the other girl in part 1 or part 2?
Part 2.
Okay, I was gonna say because I remember that scene very well.
Yeah.
When they were gonna remake The Mummy with Tom Cruise, I was very excited, but also knew they wouldn't be able to top Brendan Fraser's The Mummy.
Couldn't. Yeah, and it's unfortunate because I was really excited for the Universal Monster reboot. Didn't work out.
I know.
In 1999, there was another kind of period piece called Ravenous, and it was directed by Antonia Bird. And this is one of my favorite films directed by a woman. One of them.
Oh, okay.
It is
Ravenous. I'm looking it up because I haven't seen it, but
I'm so glad that I have so many movies that you get to see now because some of these are so good.
I will say I missed out on a lot of underground or unheard of or underrated 90s movies because I primarily like my horror fanness took a boost in the 2000s. But so I'm glad I get to go back and watch these.
So I'm a sucker for Westerns and I'm a sucker for Wendigos. And this movie is one of the few films out there that touch on like the Skinwalker Wendigo
kind of I love that
story. Now, it's not like you think. It's not a monster movie. It's just, it touches on the lore of that. It stars Guy Pearce and Robert Carlyle, and it even has David Arquette in it for a little bit.
Wow.
Very little bit. It has this cool like callback to like the Donner Party. It is a little cannibalistic. That's kind of the story. But it's such a cool movie. The story itself and the way it's told.
Funny story. I'm looking at the cast for this. The guy who plays Colonel Ives. I don't know this. He plays Rumpelstiltskin in Once Upon a Time, and Rumpelstiltskin was a movie that I mentioned earlier. Sorry, I just thought that was funny.
Full circle. Yeah, Robert Carlyle. He's so good, and he's he's probably besides Guy Pearce, he's probably the best thing about this movie is his performance. And the whole movie, I'm telling you, you're just not going to see parts of it coming. So I don't want to spoil it. So I really want you to go into a kind of unknown.
Nice. So I got 2 movies already I need to really get into. So
if I were to tell you, like, out of all of the ones that I've talked about today that you haven't seen, Ravenous is the one that I think you should definitely see first.
Okay.
Definitely
all right.
see this one.
I'm going to make a note of that.
Stir of Echoes in 1999 stars Kevin Bacon, and this is one of your film choices, and yes. I am so glad that you wanted to talk about this one.
Well,
Kevin Bacon's great.
Everyone's going to say, oh, Sixth Sense, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it was a good movie. But let me tell you something. There was a movie that came out right around the same time as The Sixth Sense that was better in every aspect and well acted, but got overshadowed by the hype that was Bruce Willis and the little I See Dead People kid. And that's Stir of Echoes. Let me tell you how creepy this fucking movie is. And it has Jennifer Morrison, actually. I think this is one of her first roles. She plays the dead girl. This is Kevin Bacon, one of Kevin Bacon's best movies, and the atmosphere, the cinematography, which I know we mention a lot, but really like the red neon sign cuts in this, the jump scares, and the atmosphere by Kevin Bacon's acting alone was really tense.
Yeah, we have another like mystery whodunit. This again was really popular in the 90s to do investigative thrillers, and this one is an investigative thriller. He is trying to investigate what's happening. It just has a paranormal aspect to it, which also was kind of popular. I mean, you had The Gift with Kate Blanchett, you had Stir of Echoes,
there was The Sixth Sense. There was a bunch of them.
Quite a few where it was kind of a mystery. You didn't know what was really going on. And I
What
think
Lies Beneath?
Fantastic movie. What Lies Beneath? That's what I was trying to think of. Thank you. That's exactly the one I was trying to think of, because I love that one.
I love it too, but I think Stir of Echoes took what they were trying to do and made it more horror.
Yeah, and I would argue that this was kind of around the time when Kevin Bacon was getting a little bit of a revival.
Yes.
Didn't he do Hollow Man shortly after this?
Yeah, I think that was early 2000s, so definitely.
and before this, he did River Wild, which is such a good thriller.
That movie always comes to mind with Kevin Bacon. Was that before or after Stir of Echoes?
Before. It was in 1996.
Okay. Yep.
I love River Wild. It's one of those movies that I revisit.
Such a good movie. It really is. Yeah. Oh, and let me just say, one of the creepiest openings and one of the creepiest kids in film, besides maybe Gage from Pet Sematary, when the kid is talking to the camera and you're like, oh, who's he talking to? Why is he talking? And he's just talking to dead people. So he doesn't have to say, I see dead people. He's already talking to them from the get-go in this movie.
Now, I definitely do like The Sixth Sense, but I am admittedly not a huge M. Night Shyamalan fan. I'm not a Shyamalan stan.
Yeah, kind of, I don't know, hit or miss for me. So
yeah.
But Sixth Sense was good, but Stir of Echoes was better.
One film I think was the perfect segue from 90s to 2000s. And again, another time capsule, but this was the in-between film. This was the film that definitely brought us in to the early 2000s, and it was Idle Hands.
Yes.
Devon Sawa, Seth Green, Jessica Alba, like these were like
Foggy Nelson from Daredevil was in this too. His real name's
Vivica
Eldon
A.
Henson.
Fox.
But yeah, Vivica A. Fox. This movie had no right being as funny and as good as it did. It really did.
Right.
Yeah.
It's still so funny. Now, a lot of the humor didn't necessarily age well, but this was the times, y'all. If you watch it, like I said, it's a time capsule of the 90s to 2000s. This was the like epitome of humor then. This is what a lot of movies were about.
Which I kind of like. This is what I liked about the 90s and the 2000s it was stupid, childish horror. And that's what we lived on because we were all just kids having fun. The humor in this movie, I love it, but that's because I grew up in those times. I could see how somebody might not like it. I
don't know. I feel like Idle Hands is on everybody's horror comedy list. It's one of those films that if anybody's looking for like a really lighthearted, goofy horror film or horror comedy, it's on my list of recommendations.
First of all, the intro to this movie is awesome. You don't know who the killer is. It's like, what's going on? And then we see Devon Sawa wake up. He's got an inhaler that's a bowl. He's smoking weed out of, and he's just walking across the street in like a mechanic shirt and boxer shorts. And it's like, all right, we're getting a different Devon Sawa here, you know?
Well, I've had a crush on Devon Sawa since I was a child because I grew up with him. We're like the same. I mean, he might be older.
I feel like
10 years older than me, but those movies were big when I was around that age.
I feel like Devon Sawa for women is what Christina Ricci is for men.
100%.
They kind of like same time, grew up through the same movies, did the same transitions.
Yes, because I fell in love with him in like Little Giant, Casper, Now and Then. Wild America was a really big one for me. I love that because I also had a huge crush on Jonathan Taylor Thomas.
Oh,
because of Home Improvement.
Yeah.
I loved Home Improvement. It was
everyone
like a family sitcom we always watched.
Everyone always used to ask me, like, joke around, are you related to Jonathan Taylor Thomas? Because my last name's Taylor. I'm like, dude, his last name isn't even Taylor.
It's
so
Thomas.
Yeah. Idle Hands really, like you said, it's a really good segue into the 2000s and a really good movie to end on because it has that humor. It introduces a lot of people that are going to be in movies in the 2000s, and
it does.
It's just really freaking great. I love that movie.
Super fun. I can't wait to get into the 2000s because I think it's just going to get wackier for us from here on out. Well, we get exposed more to horror the later it goes in this timeline, and this is because they started making way more horror films, like way more today than they ever used to. For us, we got exposed to a lot of horror growing up. I think the early 2000s, because that was like my teenage to early 20s years, that I just know so much more about those movies, that I'm much more aware of things. And then in the 2010s, I know much more about film, and what goes into it, and the access to information got way easier. So once you know more, you respect it more.
The 2 points, like, I'm interested from here on out. First of all, I was a shitbag in like the mid 2000s, late 2000s. I was just partying and being an asshole. So horror kind of disappeared from my life in the late 2000s for a little bit. I'm ashamed of it, but it is what it is. And then we get to talk about how streaming affected horror when we get to the 2010s and how it opened up a whole new world for horror.
It did. And you got indie production houses that started really producing and churning out horror. The following really kicked off. I think the fandom really grew in our generation. Our generation is like the foundation of the fandom.
I'd like to see a documentary based on that, like how horror fandom changed with a certain generation. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
But so I'm psyched, honestly, from here on out. Like 80s, I love to death. 70s, I love. 90s, I love to death. And then now it's really interesting from here on out.
I love a lot of specific films from the 70s and 80s. I hold them in very high regard, and I really, really love them. But the decade, it's not my favorite. I think if we're talking the decade as a whole, 90s and up is where things get real crazy.
I think I can agree. I think I can agree. As much as I love 80s and can call back to a ton of 80s movies, when we're talking a full decade, like you said, 90s and up is where it really digs in.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you made it this far, that was a lot of movies. I think we rapid fired them as much as possible. Join us next time for the 2000s. We'll do part 1 on Brian's channel. Fandom at Random will be linked below in the description, so you can go check out part 1 if you missed it. 70s on your channel and 80s on mine.
Yes.
I really messed up this outro. Oh my God. I'm gonna stop recording now.